Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 82. 82, moving on, moving to. 82, I think Fast Times at Ridgemont High came out in 82. I'm guessing. So if I'm wrong about the year, oh well. But since I'm mentioning it, that's an Amy Heckerling directed film based on a Cameron Crowe novel. Very few people know that he basically went undercover as a high school student, but people don't know that there's a novel before then. I know that because a dear friend of mine in junior high and high school, he hit me to it, and it's got all the dirty parts, and that was like gold. Written word smut back in the day was very alluring, and so what a different time, what a different era. You have a through line right through from Fast Times to Euphoria. And then because everything has to degenerate or escalate or, degenerate, it's almost frightful what's going on in Euphoria for parents. And I guess it was then back in the thing. So rather than it degenerate or getting worse or escalated or any of those other words, maybe it's there's nothing new under the sun. And that is what I have to console myself with this week, as far as what's going on in a mood, because good things are happening, and yet, how do you feel? How do I feel? And I guess that's what I'm trying to navigate. And I think, because I'm not really on a pop culture jag right now, I think a lot of it obviously is in transitions and fear of not knowing what your day-to-day is going to look like, which is why having habits like a gym routine or meditation routine or a writing routine, those are the ways you sustain in the down periods, which I'm supposed to be used to as an actor, but I kept myself employed with a bar gig for so long that I guess I got to feel like a kind of working stiff and maybe forgot that I was this vagabond actor, and that I'd have to get used to that. And at least I am back in the gym, and that routine can pay off for my older years, because they say move it or lose it. But what I mean about nothing new under the sun is how I have to sort of intellectually console myself about things in the zeitgeist that are going haywire. There's different circumstances, but it would have been better to mention this, and I don't do anything remotely political, but like 1979 was a situation with a foreign country, right? And a revolution, and now here we are. So for the uninformed or for the younger people, this is end times, and I guess probably I was too young to be reading the paper back then, but nothing new under the sun is what I'm saying. And so I guess why that is consoling but also a bit maddening is, if there's nothing new under the sun, then everything is just sort of repackaged. So Fast Times at Ridgemont High was a scandal. Robert Ebert famously called it, he famously wrote a review about how great an actor Jennifer Jason Leigh was, but how prurient and vile the material was, and that he thought there was nothing redeemable about that. He was kind of lumping Fast Times at Ridgemont High into the Porky's and sort of just reviled 80s nudity. And maybe it was, I don't know. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And it's definitely was more accurate to the times on the ground. But and I think eventually he may have done a re-review where he amended that. But he hated the movie. And so what I'm saying is, Fast Times at Ridgemont High was a scandal of low art, unfiltered libido, unfiltered id, and then Euphoria 40 years later is scandalous because you have to keep up in the ante. But if you just remember that And now what has happened, the thing that is not, it's not that it's nothing new, and it may even also be nothing new under the sun too, because as things get insane in culture, sometimes there is a kind of like the stock and the bond market is an inverse to the rate, the interest rate. So if you have bonds and the interest rate goes up, it's good. And if the interest rates are low, you're not getting return on your bonds. So things are in an inverse. And so people make their fortunes on being contrarian in futures markets, commodity markets, bond markets, all this stuff. And it's way above my head to understand that. But there is a correlation between culture and art. And there's inverse relationships to when it's a conservative political climate, there is a little bit more of a free-flowing, an outpouring of artistic expression. So Nixon, and then you have the psychedelic, or Vietnam with all that great music, and then the late 60s, early 70s was that new Hollywood. And then in the 80s, or it mirrors, I guess, and then you think about, the 80s was big box, greed is good. But all I'm saying is that maybe there's nothing new under the sun. But what happens now is because of new gender norms and because of new equalities, which are better for most of us, there's the gratuitous nudity of the 80s is now out of favor, at least in the films. But TV has intimacy coordinators, and so the sex, while being maybe less spontaneous, which is not what I mean to say, but my thing is, if you hire an intimacy coordinator, which for those of you who don't know, is like a sex stunt director. So you have stunts, and you have the stunts are guys are going to do the fighting and the jumping off the buildings and the driving, the smashing the cars into things, right? That would be a stunt coordinator. An intimacy coordinator is, we have love scenes. This is a very sexually charged story. They have to make out, they have to make love, and so they hire an intimacy coordinator, mostly for the I would hope for both, but for the women who were exploited more in the 80s, or thrown a curveball with a script change, and then all of a sudden they're nude and they don't know how, and there's 17 guys on the crew all of a sudden there's 2 boom operators on the day they're doing the sex scene. Like, all that stuff's been gladly removed, and rightfully so. But with the intimacy coordinator, if you're going to hire them, then they literally choreograph hand on breast, cup the butt, whatever the hell it might be. And I think the urge to tell the story with sexual scenes would be when you hire it's chicken and egg. So when you hire that position, which I'm sure is not cheap, it's a whole new department, I would imagine. You're going to get your money's worth, meaning that the scenes are going to be more rigorously sexualized. You're going to be performing crazier things. I've had auditions where I have to verbally consent to simulated sex and nudity, because these are the barriers that have come down on, nobody's really watching network television, so everything is HBO from back in the day. So all I'm saying is, while there is a push for it to not be gratuitously nude, there is also sort of, chicken and egg scenarios and getting your money's worth. And if you need an intimacy coordinator, you're probably got a rough and tumble show. And because of, Me Too and all these backlashes and toxic masculinity notions and all that nonsense, and not nonsense, but all that backlash, and to tell the truth about the monstrous behavior, you sometimes are compelled to show more monstrous behavior, and in the storytelling, but you still have an actor or an actress, or you still have people having to be that vulnerable on set. And so that is a good thing, the intimacy coordinator, before I get too far off and say that I know an actor, I think Bean, what was his name? The guy from Game of Thrones. He he stepped in shit when he said, back in the day, it was just we get on the set and just sort of have at it, and then, that's in the out of step category, and so I understand. But all I'm saying is, and then it becomes technical, and then the acting, and so I mention all of this because I had a pretty good audition this week, and I can't tell you about it. I love when actors do that, like there's some kind of exclusivity. It's just bad form, and it would jam me up if I said what for and all that. But it's a good streamer, a really good show, high budget show, good part, like a 5-page audition. That's exciting. That's the kind of stuff I look forward to. Lines to memorize, stuff to pound into your head. But and I've mentioned this before, with the self-tape era upon us, some things need a reader. Some things need a good actor on the other side. Some things don't. When you're saying, "Hey Joe," and you just wave, that you can do on your own. But with 5 pages of back and forth dialogue and beginning, middle, and end, and 2 scenes in different locations, all that, you need a decent actor. And so I don't know what your network is like, but I am blessed to have a real go-to person, and vice versa, I hope. And yet you are still at the mercy of someone else's schedule. And so you may be ready to run and gun, or you may be ready to carve out time, and you know what your deadlines are, and you know how you're feeling. And let's just say I was less than 100% and then had to adapt to a new set of circumstances. Thankfully and luckily, I was so enthused about the material that the lines came easily, so it wasn't the memorization that was sort of the pressure cooker. But because things got scuttled a little bit, the first attempt was to do it via this amazing technology that I'm talking to you through, but to have a remote voice and a floating head in space, and the device wars, because now we have multiple devices and like I guess 4 screens in a tiny apartment. And I mean, that's part of the epidemic we're all in, and I am guilty as charged. But what happens when you're working alone? You have to. And these are, I'm going to explain things like you have to peel the banana to eat the banana. I don't want to be that redundant or that obvious, but when you're working alone, you don't get action. You don't get to settle into the scene. I mean, and you can and then edit out the settling, but you have to press record and then come around, make sure you're in the right spot. And you have to know where the frame is. And then you have to find your eye line. It's not even remotely complicated. It's complicated, but it's not intellectually challenging, and I hate the phrase, it's not rocket science, but you know what I mean. And I'm not trying to overcomplicate or mystify it or make it seem anything, but I do think that, the notion that actors don't have skill sets that most people don't even contemplate, I like to stand up or stick up for myself in that regard. But it's work. It's not work. It's just complications. And so what the beauty of the internet is that information is ready. I mean, how many people are trying recipes that they'd never attempt if it weren't for Instagram recipes? I've done a couple just off the cuff that I didn't do anything but follow a 90-second, maybe less than a 90-second clip. And that's incredible to be able to just, and the sharing, and that's really what social media, for me, that was the upside of it, right? And then there is a great online thrust of working actors who then, start to have their, instead of bartending or waiting tables, their side hustle is, coaching and stuff. And so they all have loss leaders, and they share tips, and some of this stuff should have been obvious. And when you see it, you go, holy shit, why wasn't I doing that? But one of the hard things is, if you're by yourself, is how do you get your headroom? I'm in a selfie mode, or I'm into I can tell where I'm at in the frame now because I see it. But when you have to use the right side of the camera with the good lenses, How do you know where you are? And so I would use the reflection of my Raging Bull poster, but that's not a mirror and it's not exact. And sometimes, depending on the lights, you're not getting the glare you need and you can't really make out where you are in the frame. So somebody on Instagram said, you do that screen mirroring thing. If you're using your phone, you can turn your laptop into your monitor. And so then you can actually see the shot. You can see the frame, you can see your backdrop, and you can see where you're wiggling around in it. And that was a great fix. But then then when it became a remote reader, for FaceTime I use the laptop. Now I have to use the these are all first world tech problems. But I'm going to bring this thing around, I promise. And then what happens is seeing yourself before you're even like in playback can fuck you up. And I don't want to get into it because I don't want to go into that neuroses. But let's just say when people ask why do actors fuck their faces up and why is there this Ozempic craze and all this stuff, let's just say that if you have sort of a hypercritical or dysmorphic, or you're less than perfect from every angle, or you're aging, or hair is thinning, these things do pile up on you in a way that most people just don't even, and the thing with internet and the camera phones is that now everybody's obsessed about their looks, right? So don't just put it on actors. And at least I think I want to age normally. And so, hopefully you can get to the marketplace with your current appearance. But what I'm saying is this monitor thing, which was a great hack for figuring out where your head was in the frame, did start to fucking play on my psyche. And then having to find volume. So you have a lavalier mic, you have to find volume not from a human but from the speaker of your iPad, and all of this stuff starts to like crisscross and somebody, the reader calls me and he's like, I can only work off of this device on his end, and then I'm like, you can't call me because you're interrupting the shot because the phone has to answer and I have to call you, and it turns into a clusterfuck. And you're not feeling well and you have a deadline, but the issue becomes, and I'll use this for an example. There's a show on FX. It's the big kind of gossipy show called Love Story about JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. And I watch it with my girlfriend and my buddy who helps me do these readings jokes that, I go, oh man, that's the price of entry to be in a relationship. I'm glad I don't know. You have to suffer through that. And then I joke with my girlfriend. He doesn't know that I'm the one who instigated watching it. But because whether it's about the gossip, it is about the 90s in New York. And I was all there. I spent most of the 90s in New York, right? And so there are issues with all real life stories and now because there are blogs and Reddits and podcasts just dissecting these shows, the amount of weighing in on how people look and the amount of weighing in on whether they're good actors or not, or whether they're better all of that stuff comes up. And this was right after I had to send my self-tape in, and after I explained to my girlfriend about all the disasters that befell us during this self-tape, and why you want to work at the highest levels of the union, and you want your crews to be happy, because essentially when you're doing a self-tape, you're your own crew, and now you're working on multiple devices. And honestly, and this is where people get a little bitchy when they say all you're doing is saying words somebody else wrote, and it's all that haterade. But what really happened, nothing is more important than the other, but we are there to capture the scene and to capture those two actors. And so you can, and nobody's necessarily more replaceable, but when you're 4 episodes in and you have your 2 leads, they are very important and they are irreplaceable. Barring death, they are irreplaceable. And, You can find someone to duplicate the makeup. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not picking on makeup. I'm just saying that. And so what happened on my tape day was I was bugging out about technical shit. And you're a gaffer, you're the sound, and that's a lament that a lot of actors want to whine about. I'm not trying to whine about it. I'm just saying that what happened was eventually I had to sort of cajole someone to then come in person. And while I wanted to alleviate them having to leave the house, we had to do it in person just to eliminate some of that stuff. And then still, sound didn't work. And with 5 pages, and where in my case the scene was the thing, not the look, and not whether or not you could just play security guard number 2, where they're gonna like press the play and say yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah, no. At least maybe with this one it's gonna be like, what's his first moment like? Let's see how he ends it. Does he do something different? You might get a shot at some scrutiny where the acting is still the most important part. And as we boofed and jacked takes up, it got frustrating. And now the frustration can help a scene where you're playing an aggressive character. So when you say cut and you're like, fucking goddamn, we didn't get sound, like, oh, let's do it again, and you can do this, and you do we'll do it live, you go fucking Bill O'Reilly on it. That can help you. But if you're having to bring moments of comedy or lightness and your frustration, and you're just plummeting, and the acting is the premium thing that you're trying to capture, but the tech fucks you up, that it can snowball into and then I hate having to learn hard lessons, like the direction of the mic. I tried to hide it, so I put it in the wrong direction, which screwed up the volume. And then what happens is we had problems with batteries dying, and so then switching phones or switching cameras, and then your compression, when you're sending these things, you lose clarity of sound, and then and then you're not sending your best, and then you feel, on top of it being out of your control, you feel like you didn't put your best effort forward. And truthfully, when things are cooking and these scenes are set up and it's just everything's working, the fun part is the scene, the audition, and then you forget that. And then so when you're watching FX, and I was pointing out to my girlfriend as we're watching, there's some not troubling. Yeah, there's troubling stuff because it's a troubling story, but there were some disparities in performance. Let's just say that I won't pick on who. There is one person that may just have walked into an Emmy nomination on that series, and it's not who you think. But she was so emotionally raw and great that people couldn't even match. And so what I was explaining to my girlfriend is like, that's her close-up, and that's the other person's close-up. And there's some great stories about the generosity of James Gandolfini when he's number one on the call sheet. All right, the call sheet is what's going to be shot each day, and he's number one. Always. That character's number one. He's in the most scenes. He's the lead. And then there's Christopher Moltisanti, probably was number 2. Or Edie Falco would have been number 2. And then Homeboy Imperioli would have been 3. And that's kind of ever for the rest of the series. It's 1, 2, and 3. And we're shooting 3. Can you go get 1? And so he also has the right to be shot first, so that if he's got it cooking, he's going to get first crack at his close-up, and then they reverse it, and then the other person gets to go, and I wouldn't take it off because you got to give it for the audio, but you're not so required to be at your best, your peak emotional moment when you're off camera, right? Because they're either going to show the back of your ear, or they're not, or they're going to cheat it, and it's just going to be a close-up. So, and they have the 2 shots and stuff like that. These are, the things we have to do. And so he would always go first. He always had the right, but he was generous enough. A few times people have mentioned on podcasts and things, I don't know exactly when, but if the scene for the subordinate actor, let's just say, if the scene was emotional, tears, anything that had to have sort of a raw emotion, he he told the director, let them go first, which is and it's a power move. It's a G move because he has the ability to tell people what to do on the set, but he was doing it for the benefit of the actor, knowing that you I don't know, some psychos and some really like amazing instrumented, regulated actors and actresses can never run dry, especially on the tears and stuff. But that's a little nuts. And so, and even just for spontaneity's sake, a lot of times the more takes you go, the less vital it is. And then there's the directors who want to wear you out so that you don't have a lot of artificial emotion. So it's kind of a 6 of 1 kind of thing, or it just depends on the instrument, if you will. But the fact that he would let the hard emotion go first, because he knows as an actor that sometimes you just run out of steam, you lose juice, Even anger, you can only be so pissed off, and anger and rage and tears are right on razor's edge, right? So let's just say that if I did a take of the scene 3 times and we missed audio on all 3 of those times, I'm already not, and we've already had cracks at it where I couldn't hear. It's just a technical thing. And so what I was saying to my girlfriend when we were watching this, some beautiful acting going on, and the woman is cooking, and it's rage and emotion and heartbreak, and it's just, and I know that that's how we perceive it, but it's just a raw performance and a great emotional conduit in that actress. But I said to her, can you imagine if someone's phone went off? Obviously not. There are so many protocols to don't even bring a phone to set, but just for the layperson, which I hate to say because it's not like this, like I said, it's not rocket science, but just imagine, or if someone tripped on a C-stand and a fucking light fell and she just gave everything she had to this take, there you go, right there. My YouTube speaker just powered down and everything's got a fucking AI voice on it. And what if this were, I don't know what, but all I'm saying is, just imagine. She goes, I can't. That would be devastating. And I'm like, right. And that's why that crew and that set and that soundstage, that's why it is very stressful. And the first thing that goes with any kind of stress, the first thing that usually goes is your receptivity. The first thing to go when you don't feel, when you're sleep deprived, the first thing to go is your creativity, your spark, the light in behind your eyes, hydration, all these things. And so when I was just trying to explain to her why I was so kind of crestfallen about these technical issues, because it had put the acting on such a back burner, and it had put the acting on such the premium reason we're doing this is Jeff Daniels talks about how he hates the career, he hates Hollywood, he doesn't play that game, but he loves acting, in that he does all of the stuff he's done in his career for those those 90 seconds between action and cut, that the magic there is why he still does it. And so when you're doing your own self-tapes, that should also hold. And I guess it all plays, and then it all comes cascading down, because you're like, I don't have a separate bedroom, I could just leave this stuff set up. Like, you start to just beat the shit out of yourself, and all of this just to do that magic between action and cut. And that's why professional crews are worth their weight in gold, and they aren't replaceable, you know what I mean? And so I imagine that the production of anything Ryan Murphy does, I'm sure he has pros at every level, and they have respect. And that's the great Uta Hagen book, right? Respect for acting. While it's not the most important, and I think this is part of the cultural shift to I forget, CYA basket. What is it? That the soccer where everybody plays and they don't keep score, right? It's an overused lament of this is bullshit. But the idea that participation, the fact that, and all the strikes we've had, because when you're talking about labor and talent and all this stuff, nobody wants to say that. anyone is less or more important, and we're going at it. We're bending over backwards to say, the crew's just as important. But honestly, it's not. There is an artist there that you have to get the shot, and so for some of this, the most important thing is how the actor's going to get through this. Now, should that actor be a diva? No. Should that actor be difficult on set? No. I hope that sort of thing is going away. But there is something to what we do, and trained and to be able to, and just even goddamn remembering your lines when you're fucking stressing or you're doing, that's why golden hour, those shots are very difficult. And so I was just trying to explain to my girl that's why I was so, bugged out. And then and then you send it into the void, and and all this to say, like, what a crummy, absurd business. And we're starting to find out that the investment people, the volatility of a business and the randomized the risk aversion to creating art has really screwed things up, and nobody wants to invest in another Heaven's Gate or another Hudson Hawk or another Bonfire of the Vanities. But you don't get Godfathers 1 and 2. You don't get anything without a risk. But these algorithms and these spreadsheets, and I see you sound like you definitely aren't a businessman when you say shit like that. But when they try to produce content, and that's all of these euphemisms and all of this language, word salad stuff is a way to degenerate and put things into a quantifiable realm rather than the ethereal realm. And so, and then when you see the genuine article, like, this is how good an actor can be, this actor can be so good on half the scene, and the other actor could be barely hanging on conspicuously enough for you to notice, like, it literally drops when it goes to her side, and then it pops back up. You would think that we'd be working on the whole, and that it would have to match, and like it would take you out of the story. But similar to like a singer in a duet, if one sings great and one sings mid, you still marvel at how good the one singer is. And I think that's what I was noticing in the love story on that one actor. But so there are moments of transcendence, and I know the several times I've been on set, that when you're cooking so well as an actor, and that the crew notices, and they're not just fucking running through their paces for the paycheck, when they go wow, or they applaud after cut, or they give you a wink, or when, and that must have been happening in this case. And then we're sort of reminded ultimately what we're there for. And that's why I relate more to storyteller, because if the fucking costume designer's trying to tell a story via this, and the makeup, they want you to have a mustache because you're playing fucking a fucking Irish boxer from the bare knuckle era, then you want to, you're telling the story that way. And then the actor's doing it all with the body and the emotional instrument, and then the lights, and it's a beautiful thing when it's working. And even when it's mid, sometimes there can be a standout, and that all also starts all the way back to there are still a few actors who don't have to audition, but you'd be surprised how many still have to make a tape. And so it's a marvel. And I guess I should have been less angry at myself, or less defeatist about it. We got it done. And then being hypercritical, you will either all those takes I missed and all the takes I got, I bet you wouldn't be able to modulate too much of a variance, although you try to do something new every time so that you have variety. But that's really more for when you're in the show, on the show, and you want to give the director's cut. And the other thing is that with television, maybe less so with film depending on the director, but you really only have a couple takes, And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm game ready for the moment I get called up to the bigs. I don't want to belabor these takes. And so that's the other part of when the audition is tanking and you're doing way too many takes because things were fucked up, you know. A couple of, I mean, it can be as absurd as, not pressing play and you've done a hell of a thing. And so maybe I just have to take more care and not worry about the deadline and not worry about wasting someone's time. Now, if you want to then go to like a studio to pay, you only really get an hour anyway. So it becomes, it's a miracle anyone gets cast, to be honest. And so I hope and I think that casting directors understand that, and that all and I guess if you have one killer authentic moment out of a shit tape, sometimes they can glean that. Who knows? And like I said, I don't want to belabor these things and torture myself, and nothing new under the sun. I'm not alone in this. I bring that up to say, I guess I'm off course from my theme, and I just wound up making this a rant about a terrible audition, which may or may not be terrible, and I guess the pressure cooker. And so I guess where I can bring it into the desk session, into where I am with progress or lack of progress week to week, some of this stuff feels remedial, or some of it feels like relapsing. These cascading emotions, these swirls of self-criticism, when you think you were making headway, and then you sort of slide back. That's really what I mean by all this. And then nothing new under the sun, meaning if you're feeling a bit unmoored because of current events, they're never going away. And I've said before, babies were born on 9/11, and and they're fucking 27 years old today, and 26, 25, whatever. Babies were born on 9/11, and so does that person forever have to mourn his birthday? Or, and that's the yin yang. That's the somebody's worst day is somebody else's wedding day. And I guess it's more about keeping your own counsel, keeping your friends close, building a life that is independent of what you do for a living. And I think that has gotten twisted in our culture, right? What do Americans ask first? What do you do? Rather than how are you or where are you from? I don't know what the questions are in cultures that aren't obsessed with work and status and keeping up with the Joneses. And I don't know if that's human or American, and I'm not here to bag on America. I'm just, maybe it's me, maybe I don't fit. I used to hate at people asking me when I wasn't at my bar job, what do you do? And then I'd say I'm an actor or a stand-up comedian. That was always a better answer. And then I say, and if they persist, and I do 3 nights in a bar, but if I was just bartending, now I don't technically have that gig anymore. So I wouldn't ever say, and now what? I got to find a reason to exist or a purpose in life. And that's what can make you think twice about socializing, right? And it shouldn't. And thank God for my blessings, right? That I can bounce this stuff off of my girl, and she understands to the degree that she can, and I'm lucky that way too. And it's just the wonder, and I have to remember that I guess going back to how this thing started, that there's a practice that you have to keep a deal with yourself. I have a dear friend from my college days who got me interested in the gym back in college, and thank God for that. But he hasn't missed a day since then. We're talking 30 years, and he, attempted acting, and I don't know how he was supporting himself in those early years, and then eventually he has like a real studio job now, and God bless him, and he's got a family, but when he had to punch the clock at 9 to 5, he went to the gym in the mornings, 6 a.m. And I understand that now, because if the world comes crashing down, and you've heard these success gurus talk about if the things you can't change, but you can change your habits, and then cling to your habits, and then get like winner guy habits, winner lady habits, and that leads to wins. And so I've had a lot of that. I have a lot of that built in, and I do credit it to theater and training, and the rigorous training at Carnegie Mellon was so rigorous that I'm early for things, and I'm flabbergasted at appointments being, it's okay. We can text each other now why we're running late, but the idea that you're even texting me to tell me you're running late, to me, is the people with the theater ethic, we don't play that, and so you have these great habits, and then and then you forget to press the button on your lapel microphone, or your battery dies. These things are human, and these things are, I'm being maybe too hard on myself, but the drive to, and then what that does make you less a conduit to the joy and the expressiveness that really drew you to it in the first place. And so, and that would be, we're doing March Madness. I think a lot of, obviously you can do everything right and the ball bounces out of the rim, but you can tell when these games are close, you can see one team crumble and one team rise. And depending on who you're rooting for, that's it makes you feel great that there's somebody is clutch, but I don't know that it's clutch. I think it's that they aren't pressurizing the moment any different than any other moment. And I think, you can still fail, but you're more likely to catch a break when you're just, boom, this is just a jump shot at the elbow. This is just a jump shot at the top of the key. You get the rebound, you go up strong. Like, this is a free throw, like all of that. But when it's like, when you're out there thinking, this is Rick Pitino's only St. John's has been 20, like if you're starting to put any narrative into your head other than just execute, that may be where the choking and the yips and those things, and then the ball just bounces, and I suppose you can live with that. But and acting and being able to take another take and live to fight another day is not quite the same. Live theater maybe, but I have to remember to rely on the training and rely on the skills, and then rely on relaxation being the number one element to this, to not pressurize these situations. It literally is part of somebody else's homework. Somebody's getting paid 80 grand, 70 grand, I don't know how many grand, maybe a lot more, to watch my tape on a laptop or a phone or an iPad and swipe right on or left on me. And I'm putting so much angst into this thing that I do think that transmits, And again, I don't have any lofty themes today except to, find peace. I don't know how I will find it. They say peace is a mouthful of food, and that may be how fractional, or how minutely I have to measure my days to keep the wolf at bay, to keep the goblin of doubt, or the goblin of dread, or the goblin of regret. I have to keep all of that at bay by really going fractional with my day to day, I suppose. So that's 82. We started with Fast Times at Ridgemont High and intimacy coordinators and all of that, but it really came down to explaining to you this week, and I, the more about the relapse, I also think with a breakthrough, things get a little. The slide is almost the crabs in a barrel thing in your spirit, in your psyche, that maybe nothing went wrong, and everything was going right. And that audition, whether it means anything to the population, the amount of submissions for one role. So getting an audition is a victory. And then when you find out who the casting director is, and so this should have been the reward phase of my week, and I turned it into the pressure cooker of the week. And I know better, and I've had exultant and relaxed times and enjoyed my self-tapes and things like that and auditions, but I don't know. I'm hoping that this is just sort of that remnant of old wiring, the synapse, or the old whatever they talk about, the rewiring the brain, or forcing other habits, or getting some kind of practice of meditation so that you can bypass the amygdala sometimes. And it's not life and death. And so I think there are these sort of last gasps of the quote unquote old me, and that's why it rattled me this week. But I talked it through, and I thought it through, and was inspired by some good work. And I just have to remember that it was all good, and I turned it into, I don't know why I decided to turn it into shit, and that's something I got to look at. And you can see, this is why we take too much glee and too much obsession with watching people falter in the public eye. And I'm saying, if I faltered this week, nothing colossal, nothing bad happened, but I have to see it, and I have to move through it, and try not to make the same mistakes, and so that's what I'll take into the new week and my new realities, and try not to be overwhelmed. Funny enough, moving into the songs, I will post the Eddie Money track this week in the descriptions, but this week's, if I'm being honest to the playlist, this week there's literally like a rain. I used to use the sound of rain, like white noise rain, to sleep because I was a troubled sleeper or a insomniac, and so I would use the sound of rushing rain. In New York, I would use a rain machine, but then I would start to hear the loop cycle, and so then I was like, oh, I'm waiting for it to be over, and so I'd obsess about that. And which makes me think, I hate when people, and now here we go, I'm trying to land this plane and I have another digression, and I don't want to self-diagnose because I know people do that too often, but I think people misunderstand. I think some of what I'm dealing with is obsessive compulsive disorder to some degree. I have to ask about it. I never really had that discussion in therapy, but I definitely have anxiety, but I think obsessive compulsive disorder is it's easier to depict it in films and television and in stories on the news, with the water on and off, and having to circle the block 3 times or counting steps. And I do a lot of that, but and I don't have obsessive like tics, but I do latch on to thoughts that I this is why it can frustrate my loved ones, because I will not relent on a notion that is not helping me. And you should see what happens when the takes don't work and the words that come out of my mouth, and that you're this close to flipping the table. And I don't know. I wonder, and I think a lot of relaxation and burning excess energy and things like that might help. But I just wanted to mention that my version of it, or my little mild, I think we all have. Anyway, I don't want a diagnosis to make me feel like I can hide away in that, but you know what I'm saying. OCD was not discussed as a thing that is more internal than externalized. And I'm very orderly and have quirks about where things go. I think that's just getting older, but maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, so the Rain song would be it's not the Rain song by Led Zeppelin. It's literally like a new age, because what I would do is I just get a playlist of Rain, and I would put a 2-hour timer, and I'd go to sleep, and it would just, so for 1 year, the only thing I used Apple Music for was to have my sleep machine. And so somehow on the all-time list, one of these tracks made it to the list. So I'm not going to put a new age rainwater sound on my playlist. So we'll skip down to the one right after it. So this week's song next on the list is another song by Jamiroquai from the first album, Too Young to Die. So we got a pretty morbid, some morbid stuff going on today. And then the song is Too Young to Die. But you know, the scary thing about, not the scary thing, but the awesome thing about Jamiroquai, is that their lyrics sometimes were like heavy about problems and stuff, but then with these dancey beats, so that you have that sort of juxtaposition or incongruous. But I love that band, and the thing about that band is it harkens me to this sort of like phantom limb of an amputated feeling that I was somehow, you are transported to where and when that music kind of occurred. And there's something about the 90s England and the acid jazz scene, and it also brings me back to I mentioned last week about doing my first equity show in Pittsburgh, and having to instead of going to school to rehearse or to do stuff, I would take a bus to the south side of Pittsburgh and start to learn the city and be an independent person. And I had my Walkman, and I would listen to the Brand New Heavies, who was another contemporary of Jamiroquai, and that acid jazz. It's just such a hearkening, and just the sound and the bass, and that they were playing, and that he was definitely biting on some Stevie Wonder riffs and just inspired, and JK's voice just cuts through and it's killer. And it's just like, if you were, if you could, in a video games where you get to design your player and stuff, like I would probably design my band to be like Jamiroquai, because it wouldn't be like being Eminem and trying to do hip hop and sort of like cross genres and sort of be the white guy in a black art form, although you can talk about that for days. But Jamiroquai was doing his own vibe, but with players and funk, and it was danceable, but it was also played, and they could rock out too. And it's sort of like this hybrid thing that got really kind of goofy later on in more commercial things. But his vibe was just slick, and it wasn't like he was trying too hard, and he could really sing. And I fantasized they were going on tour, and they were like going to be all through Europe, and I'm like, what a jet set lifestyle that would be, to be able to go catch Jamiroquai in Rome or some shit like that. And they've had a bigger career after their big blow up in '95 in the States. They've been resonant in Europe and Japan and stuff like that. But so the song is Too Young to Die, Jamiroquai. This week you can either look it up yourself, or I'll put it in the description next week. But Eddie Money's still holding it down, and I don't know if a theme is presenting itself, but just vibe out on some Jamiroquai, and remember to breathe through, and to try to find your stroke, and try not to tense up. It's just the jump shot at the elbow, whether there's pressure on it or not. You have the muscle memory, and you've done this before, and you can get through this. And so try to chill. I guess that's what I'm going to deal with this week. So this was Death Session 82. Carl DeGregorio. Peace.